primary stands for. And that is why today we are in Texas to say, no way, Democrats. No way.
Democrats aren't the only ones focused on Houston. President Trump's campaign held an event earlier today about 5 miles away from the debate stage. The Vamos to Victory event targeted Latino voters in the greater Houston area. President Trump was not in attendance, but members of his campaign and Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel were there on his behalf. They spoke about issues they think will be important to Hispanic voters in 2020. Jeremy Wallace was at the Trump event and joins me now from Houston. He's a political writer for the Houston Chronicle. Thanks so much for being with us, Jeremy.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
So what were the issues brought up at this event, and how did the messaging resonate with voters?
Well, it was absolutely all hinging on the economy. Not surprising. You know, right away we heard them talking about the unemployment rate being at a historic low, and they continue to come back to that. You know, talking about how the tax cuts they believe have improved the economy for everybody, but particularly it's a benefit that's going on to Latino voters as well. They talked about how there's 600,000 Hispanic families who are no longer in poverty, and they attributed that to the Trump policy over the last couple of years, particularly the tax cuts.
Well, I know the Trump campaign and Chairwoman McDaniel also tried to brand the Democrats as socialist, and I wonder, in Texas there, how are voters actually responding to that?
Well, that is a very dangerous label in Texas. As you can imagine, you know, it's a pretty conservative area.
Yeah.
And we heard in 2018 when U.S. Senator Ted Cruz was running for re-election, he continually used that term, socialist, to try to pin onto his opponent, Beto O'Rourke, at the time. And it did have some impact. It did help him in that campaign. And so it's not surprising that term is going to be used a whole heck of a lot over the next 24 hours by the Trump campaign, particularly. It wasn't just at this event. They had a plane flying overhead at one point, dragging a banner that, talked about, don't bring socialism here, it'll kill jobs. They ran full-page newspaper ads in the Houston Chronicle, also warning about socialism. So it's not hard to see where the playbook here is at this point. They're convinced that will help dislodge Democrats from whoever the Democratic nominee is and move it back over to the Republicans, especially here in Texas.
Interesting. Well, Harris County, the county Houston is in, went blue in 2016 and 2018 after being a reliably Republican county. How have politics shifted there in just the past few years?
It's really been amazing. It's really a historical shift. We've been Republican when even the rest of the state was old Dixiecrat Democrat. Harris County, the largest county in Texas, was actually Republican. It didn't vote for Kennedy. It voted for Nixon. It continually did that. But in these last couple of cycles, it's been a really alarming. I think, particularly for Republicans, as they watched at one point, just John Kerry had lost Harris County by 100,000 votes. Obama ended up making it almost a draw. But when Hillary Clinton ran in 2016, she won it by over 160,000 votes. So there's real panic that that's a trend line that Republicans know doesn't look like the Harris County of old and is something entirely different. And it's really driven a lot by the diversity of Harris County. You'd be hard-pressed to find a county that's diversified more over the last 10 years. Just the Hispanic population alone jumped from 41% to it's going to be about 47% at the next census.
Wow.
And that has really kind of helped change the entire atmosphere here in Harris County. In 2018, when Beto O'Rourke was on the top of the ticket, he won by over 200,000 votes in Harris County, and that helped swing in a lot of Democrats up and down the line. In fact, there were over 100 judicial races over the last 2 cycles that have now gone from Republican to Democrat. And so that has really caused a lot of concern on the Republican Party as they try to figure out how do they address the growing diversity of Harris County and still keep with their Republican values.
Right. It would explain why Democrats really see opportunities there in the Lone Star State. Yeah. Well, Houston isn't new to hosting a Democratic presidential debate. It last did so in 1987, and a familiar face was on that stage too, Joe Biden. How did he do back then, and what are Texas voters thinking about his candidacy now?
Yeah, it's amazing. There aren't many people who were in that room, in Houston anymore. But Joe Biden was one of them for sure. And it was interesting to listen to his language back then. You hear a lot of hints of what he would be saying now, in that language, talking about this generation is the first generation that may not be as well off as their parents were. It's like that kind of language we heard on the campaign trail this year. You could hear it in 1987. He was using that language, and it's funny. As I listened to it, he takes some shots at then President Reagan for his foreign policy issues in Central America, and I kind of almost could feel you could replace Reagan with the word Trump, and you'd have almost the same kind of sentence. So it's really worth taking a look at. It's an interesting piece of history, and how even in that debate though, it was led by William Buckley, who of course is a conservative commentator.
Right.
And so you saw, even back then, the Democrats just weren't really welcomed.
Yeah.
And the only time they could really have something like this ever before was because of a conservative. So, and that's the only other time we've ever hosted a debate for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Yeah, people really should go back to the Wayback Machine there and take a look at that, especially ahead of tonight's debate. So Biden recently picked up 2 Texas endorsements ahead of the debate. Who are they, and how significant are they?
Well, the one that I was really kind of focusing on a lot was former Congressman Gene Green. He just retired last year, but he had a really good union backing and support in Harris County and Houston. And I think that speaks a lot to the kind of voters that, Joe Biden's been trying to reach out to, trying to swing them over, make sure they stay with him. And so that one was pretty interesting. I don't hear Gene Green giving out endorsements a lot, so that was kind of caught us by surprise. But the other one that was pretty interesting was Mike Collier. He had run for lieutenant governor, and although he lost in 2018, he came closer to winning the lieutenant governor's office than any Democrat in 20 years. And so he actually did better in some counties than Beto O'Rourke did, on the same ballot. And so you can see he might have some strategic asset to the Biden campaign that can help them figure out where did he do well and why. And so I think both those endorsements kind of give Biden some good on the ground presence of people who know the labor community and know maybe some more rural parts of Texas.
All right, Jeremy Wallace for us. Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.